bless this study, Lord. We ask, Lord, your Holy Spirit, Lord, would just move through Kenny and through everybody in here that participates, Lord. We just ask, Lord, you just have your hand on us and lead us and guide us, Lord, so that we can learn what you want us to learn. In Yeshua's name.
In Yeshua's name. Kenny, do I have a minute to take a picture? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, go ahead and take a picture. There's a whole mess of scriptures that go along with this that aren't written up there, so you'll just have to.
Okay, Henry, thank you. Okay.
keep up.
Sorry to disrupt everything.
Are they in order or are they messianic?
They're in Messianic, so.
Maybe.
So we start out with bow. You have a letter bait, that's the floor plan of the tent. It means a family or a house or inside. If you have the vav for the O, the pictogram is a peg, a nail it means to attach. And then you have the letter Aleph, which is a leader, chief, the strong one. And the Aleph is the first letter of the alphabet. It represents Hashem, represents God, represents the Lord, right? If you have the O in here, it adds up to 9. 9 is finality and judgment. Okay, the 2 is the 2 tablets would be the 10 words. The 6 represents man created on the 6th day. And 9, like I said, is finality and judgment. Now, you're going to see a few things here that tie in. I wrote a couple of things on here because this Torah portion includes the Passover. And you find if you take the word HaPesach, HaPesach in Hebrew adds up to 153. The Hebrew for B'nai HaElohim, the sons of God, adds up to 153. And you'll find in the New Testament, after Yeshua's resurrection, okay, you remember he's on the coast, the disciples are out fishing. He asks them, have you caught any fish?
Right.
And he tells them, cast the net on the other side. And they catch how many fish?
153.
153. Okay, 153. The Greek alphabet also has gematria, just like the Hebrew does. And the Greek word for fishes is iktus. And in the Greek that adds up to 1,224. And that's 8 times 153. And the net, todictylon in Greek, also adds up to 1224, which is 8 times 153.
Which is 9.
So you have the fishes, you have the net, and you have the words the Passover, all have a gematria that's tied in with 153, and we know 8. 8 represents the new beginning, also represents the circumcision and the covenant, and a bunch of other things. So it all ties together.
But it adds up to 9. You got the 1224, add up to 9. You get 5 and 3 and 1, that adds up to 9.
1224
All judgment.
adds up to 9. And actually 153, 1 plus 5 plus 3 adds up to 9. The same that the Torah portion adds up to if you use the vav for the O in the word bow. And so I believe when Yeshua in the New Testament, when he had them catch 153 fish, he was reminding them that he was the Passover lamb.
What was the Yavin and bow? What does that mean?
Okay.
What did you say?
What I'm saying is, in the Chumash, what it has is it'll have a dot for that O. Normally the Jewish people, they use that vav to represent the O. If you go into the, Torah scroll, it probably won't have it in there at all. It'll just have a bait and an olive.
First and second letter.
Okay.
Is
But
that,
you'll find some things with these plagues in this Torah portion. And as a matter of fact, if anybody's been keeping track, Tabernacle just a couple months ago, if you remember, we sent a team of about 12 people to Kenya, right?
Right.
And if anybody's been keeping up with the news, they have a massive swarm of locusts
Locust, right.
going across Africa, Ethiopia, Sudan, Somalia, and now it's moved into Kenya where our missions team that just came back from was at. Said that whole area there's 47% food insecure, and that's before the locusts got there.
No bueno. Absolutely devastating.
One swarm of locusts was over 25 by 35 miles. Okay, and guess what Torah portion bow starts with? Plague of locusts.
Plague of locusts.
I thought about that.
Two
What does that mean?
The plague of locusts was 2 weeks early then. Is that a sync?
Well, this Torah portion is about the locust. It starts with the plague of the locust.
What is that indicating though for these times?
It's
Is
not
there
on
any
time.
It's really bad news for them, no
It's
food,
indicating, I believe it's indicating to us,
spiritually.
okay, spiritually, we have a responsibility anyway to be ready all the time, right?
Amen. Repent, ask for
And we're
forgiveness.
supposed to be obedient to the Spirit all the time and walk the walk that He wants us to walk
The kingdom of God is
and
at
share
hand.
the kingdom
That's what
of
the
God is at
Holy
hand.
Spirit keeps saying, the kingdom of God is at
Okay.
hand.
The
Repent.
kingdom of
Repent.
God is in you, right?
Don't beat the table.
And so wherever you walk, you're supposed to be bringing the light of the Torah, the kingdom, to other people, right?
Doing his work.
Doing His work.
Kenny's a teacher.
And so that's just the brief intro. It's found Exodus 10:1 to 13:16. Haftarah is Jeremiah 46:13 to 28. And John chapter 19:31 to 37 is actually part of the New Testament portion. But basically the Passover was to be repeated every year for all generations forever. And the Passover was supposed to be a picture of the Messiah to the Jewish people so that they would recognize Yeshua when He came. So it was repeated year after year after year after year. This is a picture of the Messiah. He's coming. And be ready for it because these are all the signs. Okay? And we'll get to that after we go through a couple of plagues and explain some of these things. So go to Exodus chapter 10. And Lloyd, do you have a Bible there?
You know, I ran right off lit.
There's 2 or 3 on the shelf there.
Yeah, and you need that light on over there so you can see. I'll turn it on. It's the one all the way, the other one on the right, the all the way on the right. That one should do it, but it's not gonna be very bright.
I got a flashlight if you need it.
Tissues.
It's there, it's in Bible.
He's probably got 6.
Thank you. How many do you need?
No, if you want red, you gotta have a Bible.
Need a flashlight? No, I don't have a button. There's 2 on the shelf though. Pretty Bible. Got a cell phone, you got a light on the cell phone.
That always works.
Light on my
So
keychain.
we'll have Lloyd can read chapter 10, verse 1 through verse 7.
You got a light, bro?
I don't know, I'll have to see
How big the print is.
Ken,
Got that covered.
153. Is that Sons of God, the Passover?
The Passover, the fishes, and that they all add up to 100. Well, the other ones add up to 1224. It's a whole-
Exodus 10, 1 through 7, okay, I got it.
12 what?
I'm gonna give it to him.
1224 is 8 times 153.
Is a multiple of what?
8 times 153.
It's 1224.
What's
So
the
they
8?
all tie in with the 153.
What's the 8?
The multiplier.
8 is a new beginning. That's what they're going for, they're getting out of Egypt.
Why'd you put 8 in there?
That's a little bigger.
Where'd 8 come from?
8 is the multiplier of the 153 to get 1224.
Was
Be different from the other
1224?
way.
1224 is the gematria for the fishes and the net and the sons of God.
I don't think we're getting there. And put my oxygen on, maybe I think better.
Yeah,
Hey,
okay, everybody quiet. Now Lloyd's gonna read verse 1 through 7.
thank you so much.
All right. Now, these are the generations of Shem, Ham, and
No, this is Exodus chapter 1.
I know.
Exodus?
That's the 7th.
Exodus,
And this will be the 8th plague.
1 through 7.
And remember now that these plagues come, there's 3 sets of 3 plagues. And on the first plague out of each set of 3, the Pharaoh was warned at the river. The second time he's warned at the palace. And then when the third plague in the series comes, there's no warning
In all 3 instances.
in all 3 instances. So it goes, so he's warned at the river, then he's warned at the palace, and then he gets corrupted by the third one because there's no warning.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Lloyd.
Then the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servant. And I might show these signs of mine before him, in order that you may tell in the hearing of your son and of your son's son, your son's son, what things I have done in Egypt and my signs which I have done among them, that you may know that I am the Lord. Moses and Aaron came to Pharaoh and said to him, thus says the Lord, the God of Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may serve me. For if you refuse to let my people go, indeed tomorrow I will bring locusts into your territory, and they shall cover the face of the earth such that no one will be able to see the earth. What's more, they shall eat the remainder of that which has escaped, that which remains to you from the hail, and shall eat every tree which grows for you out of the fields. And they shall fill your houses, and the houses of your servants, and the houses of all the Egyptians, which neither your fathers nor your fathers' fathers have seen since the day that they were on the earth that day to this day. And he turned and went out from Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh's servant said to him, how long shall this man be a snare to us? Let the men go so that they may serve the Lord their God. Do you know yet that Egypt is destroyed?
Okay, now so far, what did we do? In the last Torah portion, okay, in the last Torah portion, they went through the first 7 plagues. Okay, so for a review, there's the first set, where the Lord says, I am Adonai, okay? So you have the river turned to blood, and he's warned at the river. You have the plague of frogs, he's warned at the palace.
river in Russia turned to blood recently.
Okay, you have the plague of lice, there was no warning, that was the third plague. Then the second set of 3 shows that the Lord has control over all the earth. So you have the swarms, and the Pharaoh's warned at the river. You have the pestilence, he's warned at the palace. And then they're covered with boils, and that's the 6th plague, they have no warning. Then you have the third set. You have the plague of hail, he's warned at the river. The plague of locusts, he's warned at the palace. And then the plague of darkness, there's no warning. Okay? And so right now we're up to the 8th one, the locusts. Now, They're telling the Pharaoh here what? Do you not yet know that Egypt is lost? I mean, after all of those plagues and now the locusts come, they finish off what's left. Now, when you go into this, in verse 5, it says here, it will cover the surface of the earth so that one will not be able to see the earth, and it will consume the remaining residue of what was left by the hail. And they have several different commentaries. Okay, and you'll find in the Jewish Chumash, in the Torah, what they'll do is they'll have the Rashi commentary and they'll have the Targum of Onkelos. And what a lot of people don't understand is Onkelos was actually related to the season. And what happened was, when he was in the land, he converted over and became a believer in the one true God, and he wrote commentaries on the Torah. When the Caesar sent soldiers to try and get his crazy son to come back home and be where he belonged, he converted all the soldiers over to the one true God, so they had to send some more.
Wow.
And so actually in the Hebrew Chumash, that has the first 5 books of the Torah, and it'll have, one side will be in Hebrew, the other side's in English. It has the Targum of Onkelos and the Rashi commentary under that. It'll have a combination where they distill out of the Targum of Onkelos and the Rashi commentary the most important points out of the 2 commentaries, and they have them translated into English on the bottom. But according to Onkelos, where it says cover the face of the earth, it means to cover the eye of the earth, which is the letter of Ayin. And it says, and shall cover the eye of the son of the earth, so that its rays will not reach the earth, which meant that the swarm of locusts was so thick that it basically blacked out the sky and made it look like midnight at noontime. Hundreds of millions of locusts just coated the whole sky and blocked every ray of the sun from even reaching the ground. And they said that the people walking on the ground had to wade through locusts as they walked. Okay,
But if you look at, for instance, the clouds, and you'll see a beam come through, that beam comes through in one location.
right.
Okay? So you've got Goshen that's got sunlight,
No locusts.
nothing, no, it's just a beautiful day. And you got Egypt, which is a given location for those locusts to go over
Right.
to darken out the sun.
Right. And so it says here, so that the rays shall not reach the earth. Another man, a Barbanel, said the sun, which is the light of the earth, when it casts forth its rays as the eye upon the object that is seen, means that the locust would be so thick between the heavens and the earth that the eye of the earth, which is the sun, could not cast one ray upon the earth. That's pretty nasty, right?
That's nasty.
Okay. Exodus. Okay, Pliny said that the locusts come in such large multitudes that they could darken the sun. In
Like a cloud.
the document Natural History. They would eat the residue of the wheat, the rye, and the rice, and anything not destroyed by the hail, and they'd eat all of the grass and all of the herbs, any green thing, there would be nothing left. Okay? There was a man that wrote a book called Travels, and his name was Dr. Shaw. And he traveled around the world. And he was in the Barbary Coast in 1724 and 1725. He said the locusts climbed over and advanced over every tree and wall that was in their way, entered into everybody's house and bedchamber like a bunch of little thieves. Okay? Pliny states that in Cyrenaica, which was near Egypt, Acts 2:10, they had a law made to diminish locusts to keep them under, that they observed 3 times a year. They had to break the eggs of the locusts, kill the young, and kill them when they were grown up. The Torah of Jonathan said, "Do you not yet know that by his hand the land of Egypt will perish?" In 1527, locusts came from Turkey. They had a locust swarm that was 20 miles around and devoured everything for a 20-mile area. Okay, it denotes the desert wind that brings destruction, and the locusts going across Africa now are called desert locusts.
Right.
Because they come up from out of the desert. The Septuagint said that the swarms of locusts came from Ethiopia. Okay, it says in verse 10:14, actually that they're a special creation of God. Before them, according to Revelation 9:1. In Revelation 9:1, you have the 5th trumpet judgment.
Right.
And in Revelation 9,
Well, in eastern Ethiopia or Somalia, there's a whole area where it's sulfur, and the volcano is close to the surface of the crust.
okay, in Revelation 9, it talks about the 5th trumpet, and this is what it says. Okay, Revelation 9:1. And the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star from heaven which had fallen to the earth, and the key of the bottomless pit. And it goes on, and it says here that they came out of the bottomless pit. Power was given over them. As the scorpions of the earth had power, they were told that they should not hurt the grass of the earth nor any green thing, but only the men that didn't have the seal of God. And then talks about the appearance of the locusts, and that's in Revelation chapter 9. But this is a special group of locusts they're talking about here. But if anybody wants to, they can take a look at their cell phone, and it shows the swarms of locusts going across Africa, through Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya.
Swarms of locusts in Africa.
And I showed a couple of people at Tabernacle back a couple hours ago. I was there. I showed Rochelle and Dr. Leonard and Jennifer and a few other people. And it showed a man standing there. And all you could see was a swarm of locusts all around him.
Yep, I see it. Full-blown crisis. Did you live?
Okay? Go ahead and read it, Red.
Well,
What did they used to eat?
They eat everything.
Grass,
Grass,
no, you
leaves off
eat
the trees.
dried locusts with honey. It's harvest time. No.
Yeah, you mean fight back, eat the locusts.
Yeah.
Get your nets out.
Yeah, you know.
Dry 'em out.
locust swarms of biblical proportions are effective crops across a wide swath of Africa and Southwest Asia, spurring alarm among top international officials. A major concern is famine. The United Nations is warning that mass swarms of desert locusts are endangering food supplies in eastern Africa. In response, officials in Rome mobilized an emergency briefing yesterday in a bid to raise money, noting the situation has a high potential to devolve into a full-blown crisis. This is an unprecedented situation that we are facing, end quote, said Dominique Burgett, an emergency services director at the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. He said the locust infestation in Africa is now FAO's top priority, so forth. Sonny Perdue received assurances of support from the United States, U.S. Agency for International Development says it released $800,000 to support FAO's response in Eastern Africa. Cyclones that struck the driest parts of the Arabian Peninsula last year triggered the current crisis, creating ideal conditions for the desert locust species to multiply. Left to breed in isolated corners of Saudi Arabia and Yemen, and in the ongoing war in Yemen, the locust swarms crossed to the Horn of Africa, where they were given further support by another cyclone. More breeding cycles are expected as swarms increase in size 20-fold with each successive generation, and could reach India by June. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres took to Twitter yesterday after
The
drawing
volcano eruption in the Philippines 2 weeks ago.
worse than
About
outbreak.
virus going on.
That's why I know we're in the tribulation beginning, because it's the beginning of sorrows.
In Somalia,
Isn't that- oh,
Okay.
that's
expected to
right.
spread
Okay, listen to
to
Brad.
neighboring countries. You got 3 countries there: Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia, and it's suspected to spread to neighboring countries. So who are the countries around there? Desert locusts are extremely dangerous, Guterres wrote, triggered by the climate crisis. The outbreak is making the dire food situation, security situation in Eastern Africa even worse. So on ravenous species that eat its own weight in food every day. Swarms easily consume entire fields and form mass clouds large enough to block out the sun. There was quake 2, moving up to 150 kilometers in a day. Is that 100 miles or 95 miles?
Yeah, 95 miles.
It's certainly the most dangerous migratory pest in the world, the desert locust, said Keith Crespin, FAO's senior agricultural officer. A swarm the size of Rome can eat enough food in one day as everybody in Kenya. The next growing season is around the corner, Crespin added. That will coincide with a new generation of swarms, so here we have a tremendous threat. Crespin said governments are trying to contain the swarms with aerial and ground spraying, but noted that one such effort in Ethiopia was overwhelmed by the massive size of the swarms. Keep getting a stupid advertisement. Crespin said FAO is now classifying the situation as an upsurge, which is one step before full play. The United Nations Central Emergency Response Fund has already authorized the release of $10 million to help governments contain infestation. FAO is seeking at least $70 million in additional assistance. Money is needed immediately. So this is a situation worst in 25 years, and the worst Kenya has seen for 70 years. CERF administrators added. And Rome.
They said one swarm was like 25 miles by 35 miles over 150 million locusts.
And deep.
And if they multiply by 20 times, each time they,
It's going to India too, and India only a
well, what
few
did you
years
say?
ago,
150 kilometers a day?
yeah, to 95 miles.
A day. So they eat up 95 miles and then they just go to the next section.
Its own body weight in one day. And it's about to have another cycle, another breeding cycle in the
Yeah,
next
so-
season.
So what did they used to eat?
They're trying to kill them, but it didn't say much about them
Locusts and
dying.
honey, so harvest time.
Well, there's one thing,
This was raining, but
Huh?
there's one thing about the locusts, they got to be a delicacy because John the Baptist ate it while
That's right.
locusts and honey.
That may be a different thing. That's the locust on
Harvest.
three.
Carol, Kenny. In 1977, I was in Nigeria.
Yeah.
And it happened to be the night that the locust was going to come in and all of the, now I was trying to think, that's a long time, they really increased. This community, they were all getting ready, they knew it was coming and they had their lights and they had everything so that they could catch them and they ate them.
That's right.
they 7 years early.
Not when you have
Locusts have
100,
parasites.
not when you have 150 million on.
They're 7 years early.
That probably, you have to go back that many years
Yeah.
that it wasn't
Yeah.
that.
So now,
But they knew when they came in, and I think
This is
it was
what-
every 7 years.
Right, so this is what Lloyd just read. This is what Moses just told the Pharaoh. If you don't let us go, this is what's coming.
That they're increasing.
So he's giving them a warning ahead of time.
Well, we used to have like a 7-year locust and a
Okay, so
13.
now, what's your name again?
Every 7 years.
Charlene, go ahead and read verse 8
So it's every 7 years.
through verse
I don't know now. Let me get this over.
20.
Are we in 9?
You know, it's
Chapter 10,
coronavirus
chapter 10, verse 8 through 20.
in China, and a lot of people have suffered from that. That was started in a lab in Canada. It started in that bad food.
Then Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh. Go worship the Lord your God, he said, but just who will be going? Moses answered, we will go with our young and old, with our sons and daughters, and with our flocks and herds, because we are to celebrate the festivals to the Lord. Pharaoh said, the Lord be with you if I let you go along with the women and children. Clearly you are bent on evil. No. Have only the men go and worship the Lord, since that's what you have been asking for. Then Moses and Aaron were driven out of Pharaoh's presence. And the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over Egypt, so that the locusts will swarm over the land and devour everything growing in the fields, everything left by the hail. So Moses stretched out his staff over Egypt, and the Lord made an east wind blow across the land all that day and all that night. By morning the wind had brought the locusts. They invaded all Egypt and settled down in every area of the country in great numbers. Never before had there been such a plague of locusts, nor will there ever be again. They covered all the ground until it was black. They devoured all that was left after the hail, everything growing in the field and the fruit trees. Nothing green remained on the tree or plant or in all the land of Egypt.
Devastation.
Pharaoh quickly summoned Moses and Aaron. I'll bet he did. And said, I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now forgive my sin once more and pray to the Lord your God to take this deadly plague away from me. Moses then left Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord, and the Lord changed the wind to a very strong west wind, which caught up the locusts and carried them to the Red Sea. Not a locust was left anywhere in Egypt, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go.
He did not let the Israelites go. Now they say supposedly that during this time period that there was actually a border dispute between the nation of Egypt and the nation of Ethiopia, and that the plagues actually defined what the true border was between Egypt and Ethiopia, because the plagues only happened in the land of Egypt. So that defined the border between the two countries. That's how massive it was. And if you read in some of the histories, if you go into Josephus, it'll tell you about Moses and the different things that happened to him after he fled away from Pharaoh. That, like originally he was running the Egyptian, like Joseph was running the Egyptian army, you remember, back in the beginning?
Yep.
Okay, and then Moses grew up, he killed the Egyptian and he had to flee.
Yep.
And when Moses fled, he didn't go straight to Midian. They said what happened was he went to Ethiopia, and there was a whole bunch of things that happened before he finally ended up in Midian. But
Where is that available as far as any type of text?
Josephus,
Yasher.
got the book of Yasher also in Josephus.
I don't trust Josephus because he was basically a traitor. He was Flavius, but Josephus named after him.
Flavius Josephus.
Yeah, Flavius is the one that killed the Jews. He was just a wimp.
Yeah, but most of his accounts are
You have to
verified.
remember, okay, Josephus was a priest in Jerusalem. And they say he was actually one of the leaders of the Israeli army when the Romans conquered Jerusalem. Josephus was actually in a suicide pact with a whole group of people. He was the only survivor. somehow he escaped, and the Jewish people considered him a traitor, but he was recognized as a legitimate historian. And he wrote the history. He was supported by the Romans to write the history because he was a priest, he knew the whole history, he was personally there for everything that happened, so he was an eyewitness. And he was proficient in all of the languages. And the Romans could use the writings of Josephus to show other nations, this is what we do to nations that try to rebel against us. So in a way, yeah, the Romans could use what Josephus wrote.
I just don't know how accurate all of it, you know, when you think
Okay.
about the Vatican and the Jesuits and how they basically produced history. And if you go back in history, you'll find a date, like let's say 1556 with the letter I or the letter J in front of it, which means in the year of. So we could literally be off 1,000 years because the Masons, the Illuminati,
Well, there's a
the
bunch of things, Richie, there's a bunch of things as far as the calendar goes. Even the Jewish people know that the modern day calendar is wrong, and they have people working on it.
The pyramids were built 230 years later than what the Egyptians date them to, because the date of the flood has been verified and stipulates the time frame. So you have an error of 230 years. There's no 1,000-year error. And Josephus, I've read 2 different books on him. He's more accurate than Origin or
Yeah, of course, or the
what's
church
his name?
fathers, yeah.
And then the other manuscripts cite Josephus as being
do some research on it before you make a statement.
most accurate. I have. I just said that.
Okay.
Plenty and Tacitus,
So,
same.
so anyway, we've had all of these locusts, and now what does the Pharaoh do?
Plenty.
He wants to get out of the plague again, right?
Yeah.
Get these things out of here,
Raid.
okay? Now, what happens next?
Raid.
Okay, the swarm is gone, and now we come to the 9th plague.
That's true.
And you don't see anywhere here in the scripture. Now, you saw here that at the locust plague, where was Moses? Moses and Aaron came to Pharaoh, right? Verse 3.
Origin had problems with the Catholics, and the Catholics messed up with his information.
Now, the 9th plague, we'll start with, let's see. Okay, Richie, you got a Bible back there?
Yep.
Okay, you want to go ahead and read verse 21?
Look at that.
Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand towards the heaven, so there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, the darkness which may be felt. So Moses stretched forth his hand toward the heaven, and there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. But all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. Then Pharaoh called Moses and said, go serve the Lord. Only let your flocks and your herds be detained. Even let your little ones also go with you. But Moses said, you must also give us sacrifices and burnt offerings so that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Our livestock will go with us also. Not a hoof will be left behind. For we must take of them to serve the Lord our God. And we do not know with what we must serve the Lord until we get there. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go. So Pharaoh said to him, get away from me, watch yourself, do not see my face anymore, for the day you see my face, you shall die. And then Moses said, as you wish, I will never see your face again.
And so Moses told him, "You have spoken correctly, I will never see your face again." Now, has anybody been inside, has anybody here ever been inside a cave when they shut all the lights off?
Yeah.
Okay, and you don't know what's in front of you, you don't know what's in back of you, you don't know what's inside, on either side of you, and it's like being a blind man.
You can't see your hands.
You can't see your finger like if it's on your nose.
Yeah.
Okay? And so all of these people are totally terrified. It says that they wouldn't even rise from their place, that the darkness was so thick. Now, there is an internet website, I don't know if you'll be able to find it. It was put out by a Jewish man claiming that there's actually and it starts out actually with a volcano in the
Right.
Mediterranean.
I've seen it.
Huh?
I've seen that video.
Yeah. And I believe he follows a very logical progression, and it's backed up by scientific evidence. And I agree with him up until some of his comments, like right near the end. I don't know if you saw that, Richie, about where the Red Sea crossing was, but everything before that is a very logical process. And he basically said the volcano goes off, causes an earthquake, stirs up the iron sediment in the river, turns the water red. The fish die in the river because they can't leave the river. When the oxygen content in the river drops, all the frogs hop out and plague the land of Egypt. And it just goes through a whole through a whole logical progression in the fact. And so he was showing, the Jewish man was showing in this video how God used nature, because God is in control of everything, how he used natural means to bring about all of the plagues in the Exodus to set his people free.
But that would indicate that it was the ash from the volcano and not the plague of locusts, the dark of the sky.
The darkness here, he believes, the man in that video believes that the 3-day darkness here was caused by the ash from the volcano. The ash comes out of the volcano, goes across the Mediterranean, crosses the land of Egypt and blocks out the sun. And after 3 days, the ash from the prevailing wind, the ash dissipates and then the sun reappears.
From my understanding,
Look at Mount St. Helens. Did you follow that in 1980?
Yeah, my
Okay,
son lives there.
okay.
He lives
Case
on the-
closed, right there. That's what it does.
He does?
Yeah, 60 miles from the volcano.
The ash was in the sky for,
He still lives there.
It's so
10
thick.
days?
this one's massive.
Except for 10 days after
Go
Mount
ahead
St.
and ask the
Helens.
question, just ask it. Go ahead, Darnell.
I wanted to ask something. Are you sure God just turned it turned it red or it turned it to blood?
Well, the scripture says blood.
It says blood.
Remember, there's also iron in your blood. That's why it's red.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Also,
I'll take it literal.
where you have the plague of the firstborn, which is coming up here, where you have the plague of the firstborn,
Iron makes it red, right?
okay, the ground,
I don't like that either.
in an earthquake, the ground opens up and the gases
Right.
come up out of the ground.
Right.
In Egypt, the custom was that the person with the highest position in the family was the firstborn. And the firstborn, because he was the highest level, got to sleep in the lowest position, which was closest to the ground.
And that happened
And
in
so when the
Africa.
gas came up out of the ground, it suffocated all the
Yes.
firstborn because they were the closest
To the-
to the ground level
Yep.
where the gas cloud came
Right.
up out of the ground.
Yeah, they had that happen in Africa, no, they did
It just happened
the
in
water
Africa
turned
not
blood
too many
red,
years ago.
and the gas came in, and it was low
It wiped
there,
out the whole village and formed a
Yep.
cloud
killed everybody
across the
sleeping
ground.
next to the ground.
Killed everybody in the village.
And they're
Some
asleep.
villagers that were staying up on the mountain came down the next day to their
Everybody's
village.
gone.
All of the animals and all the people in the village were dead.
Mhm.
What's going on in Australia?
Of course, now, that's, that's a modern occurrence, that's something that happened, and it's something that parallels something that happened in the scripture. So however the Lord produces these plagues, he can use supernatural means or he can use natural means, whichever method he wants to use. God has many different ways to do things. Okay.
Are you going to bring up Emanuel Velikovsky and his work?
Yeah, Emanuel Velikovsky, have you read it?
He was a Jew.
Yeah, he was a Jewish man.
I have glossened over it. It's an interesting theory,
Yeah,
how that the incoming rogue planet could cause such
Yeah.
disturbance in the
Yeah.
Earth's ecosystem
yeah.
and
I
all.
don't agree with it.
You don't believe that?
Not at all.
That's
And they
okay.
have it
I do
based on-
go with Anatoly Fomenko, who was a mathematician,
Yeah.
equating what our counters are, though,
Yeah.
and
So-
his basis of truth.
But there's different theories on how everything happened,
Yeah.
but we know according to scripture that it did happen.
It happened when God said it.
Well, it's
And it
Midrash
happened when
time.
God said it would
We can
happen.
Feel free.
So using natural or supernatural means, God can do it either way.
It's his.
Because I've seen both
It's his
ways.
plan and his purpose. Ta-da.
Yeah.
Okay, and Moses tells him here, I'll never see your face again. And so we get to the plague of the firstborn.
You heard about the room of the 12 rabbis, they ended up with 13 opinions. You gotta try to
So-
avoid that.
So we start with so we go to chapter 11 now.
11.
And Diane, Linda, did you read yet?
No,
Okay, Linda, go ahead and read chapter 11, it's a short one, but it's the plague of the firstborn.
now the Lord had said to Moses, I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. After that, he will let you go from here, and when he does, he will drive you out completely. Tell the people that men and women alike are to ask their neighbors for articles of silver and gold. The Lord made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and Moses himself was highly regarded in Egypt by Pharaoh's officials and by the people. So Moses said, this is what the Lord says, about midnight I will go throughout Egypt. Every firstborn son in Egypt will die from the firstborn son of Pharaoh, who sits on the throne, to the lastborn son of the slave girl, who is at her handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle as well. There will be loud wailing throughout Egypt, worse than there has ever been or ever will be again. But among the Israelites, not a dog will bark at any man or animal. Then you will know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. All these officials of yours will come to me, bowing down before me and saying, go, you and all the people will follow you. After that I will leave. Then Moses, caught with anger, left Pharaoh. The Lord had said to Moses, Pharaoh will refuse to listen to you, so that my wonders may be multiplied in Egypt. Moses and Aaron performed all these wonders before Pharaoh, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go out of his country.
Okay, so now we go back to the beginning of chapter 11, okay, in verse 2, He says, let each man request of his fellow, each woman from her fellow silver vessels and gold vessels, right? And they go out of Egypt with what? A gigantic fortune. And how did that fortune get there? Well, if you remember, Joseph's brothers sold him as a slave down into Egypt, right? And then what happened? Joseph interpreted the dreams. He was placed in charge of the land of Egypt. Nobody could what? Raise a hand or foot without Joseph's say-so. Basically, Joseph was put in charge of the whole military of Egypt because what did he have to do?
You got the ring and the...
He had, there was a famine all over the world. Okay? 7 years, he collected food in Egypt and stored up the food in the granaries, right, without number. All the other nations of the world, it says, ran out of food. They came to Egypt to buy food for their nations. So all the wealth of the whole entire world was coming into Egypt during the whole time of the famine to buy grain. And Joseph was storing up all of this treasure so that all of his descendants could take it all with them when they left.
It was back paid for slavery, right?
That's what they said.
I think there's even record in China that there was a great famine.
There was a great famine. And when you read about Joseph, it said, it didn't just say the surrounding nations, it said the whole world
Wow.
came to Egypt for grain. And so we talked about, he's given the warning now about the firstborn, that's the next plague. And now in chapter 12, he's going to talk about Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the month, and he's going to talk about the Passover. And we know now, okay, the month is either called Abib, some people call it Abib, some people call it, normally it's called Nisan. And we know that 7 years out of every 19 on the modern calendar that they have an extra month, right? They have first Adar and second Adar. And that was to keep the calendar lined up because to have the Passover, the barley harvest has to be ready because you have to wave the barley sheaf for first fruits, right? And so if the barley harvest wasn't ready to do first fruits, they had to have a second month of Adar until the harvest was ready.
Yeah.
Of course, they haven't exactly been following that. What they did is back years ago when they had the dispersion and they met in Alexandria, Egypt, and they decided that they had to write everything down instead of having the oral tradition. So they did the Mishnah, the Gemara, and all the things. And because the temple was destroyed, they couldn't have the witnesses anymore to proclaim the new moon in the beginning of the month. They had their mathematicians calculate out a perpetual calendar. Okay? To give you an idea how accurate that calendar was, okay, they calculated, the Jewish people, their mathematicians, calculated out the month to the 1,000th of a day. Okay, so it was like 29.596 or whatever it was days. That was the same number of days in a month that NASA used up until the 1960s when they recalculated it with satellites. And the only reason it was different was because the Jewish mathematicians went to the 10,000th place, the 1,000th place, and the NASA scientists went to the 10,000th place. So they added an extra digit. So So it came out to 10,000 of a day different. But that's after a time span of almost 2,000 years,
That's amazing.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
calculated out by their mathematicians. And that's the same perpetual calendar that they've used ever since then. But now the Sanhedrin, the modern one, says, yeah, we realize it's a little bit off now, and we'll have to fix it. You know, because they couldn't declare the new moon because they didn't have the temple and the witnesses. It was based on the position of the moon and the shape of the moon and the direction the crescent was facing and what part of the sky it was in. You know, the initial crescent of the new moon. And they could calculate out what month it was and all the different things. So,
That's amazing.
so he starts out here. This is one of the first commandments that they have, is establishing that calendar. So, Diane, could you go ahead and read chapter 12, verse 1 through verse 20. I'm going to give you a big one to read.
Oh, okay. And the Lord spoke unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb, according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for an house. And if the household be too little for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next unto his house take it according to the number of the souls. Every man according to his eating shall make your account for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. Ye shall take it out from the sheep or from the goats, and ye shall keep it up until the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. And they shall take of the blood and strike it on the two side posts and on the upper door post of the houses, wherein they shall eat it. And they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Eat not of it raw, nor sodden at all with water, but roast with fire his head with his legs, and with the pertinence thereof, and ye shall let nothing of it remain until the morning. And that which remaineth of it until the morning ye shall burn with fire. And thus shall ye eat it with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and ye shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. And the blood shall be to you for a token unto the houses where ye are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you, when I smite the land of Egypt. And this day shall be unto you for a memorial, and ye shall keep it a feast to the Lord. Throughout your generations ye shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever. 7 days shall ye eat unleavened bread, even the first day ye shall put away leaven out of your houses. For whosoever eateth leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. And in the first day there shall be an holy convocation, and in the 7th day there shall be an holy convocation to you. No manner of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat, that only may be done of you. And ye shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for in this selfsame day have I brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall ye observe this day in your generations by an ordinance forever. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at even ye shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at even. 7 days shall there be no leaven found in your houses, for whosoever eateth that which is leavened, even that so shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he be a stranger or born in the land. Ye shall eat nothing leavened. In all your habitations shall ye eat unleavened bread.
Okay. There it is.
Good job.
Good job. I know it's a long section to read, but there's several things in here we look at. So you start out, you have Rosh Chodesh, right? You have the beginning of the month. You start with the first of Nisan, and he says on the 10th day of the month, you're supposed to choose a lamb and to their home and tie it to their bedpost. And they were with that lamb for the whole 4 days until they sacrificed it. Okay, now there's some other things about this that will tie in with Yeshua. Okay, now the way it works, if you take a look at the calendar, Yeshua in the New Testament, you remember he's not going to travel on the Sabbath day, right? And so he's entering Jerusalem where he has his triumphal entry. He's coming in on the 10th of Nisan, and he's inspected by who? The scribes, the Pharisees, the Gentiles, Pilate, all of these different people, right? Pilate doesn't find any fault with him. We go through all of these things. Now, if you take a look at a calendar, and I don't know if I can make a little one here. But you say, make this night, because the Jewish day starts at night, right? And this will be the day. And so it would go like this.
$6.15, correct?
Hmm? And 15. 16, 17. And then you'll have 18 up here. Okay, now what'll happen is, okay, this is the 10th. Shabbat just ended, you had Havdalah, right? Okay, so Yeshua comes in, he has his triumphal entry. You have 1, 2, 3, you have 4 days. Okay, the night of the 14th, he had the Passover Seder with the disciples, right? He's betrayed by Judas, he's taken from the garden. Okay, the 14th of Nisan, at the 3rd hour of the day, he's nailed to the tree of sacrifice, right? And from the 3rd hour of the day to the 9th hour of the day, he's on the tree. Now, we'll go through some information here. Normally, on a normal day, the 3rd hour of the day was the morning sacrifice. The 9th hour of the day was the evening sacrifice. On Passover, because they had so many lambs to kill, to sacrifice, what they did is they moved up the afternoon sacrifice from 3 o'clock to 2:30. And then they sacrificed the first Passover lamb at 3 o'clock. And so Yeshua is on the tree. He's nailed to the tree the third hour of the day, 9 o'clock in the morning. He's on the tree for the evening sacrifice, 2:30 in the afternoon. And he commends his spirit to the Father, the 9th hour of the day, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when they sacrificed the first Passover lamb. So he's on the tree for all three of those sacrifices. The morning sacrifice, the evening sacrifice, and the Passover sacrifice. Also, from the 6th hour to the 9th hour, you remember in Egypt they had a plague. They had 3 days of darkness. When Yeshua was on the cross, the 6th hour to 9th hour, there's 3 hours of darkness. Also, after Yeshua goes into the tomb, he's in the tomb for 3 days and 3 nights, right? Well, if you take a look here, okay, he's going to be put in the tomb right at sunset on the 14th. He's giving up his spirit at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right? You have to have Nicodemus, Joseph of Arimathea, they got to go to Pilate, they have to have permission to get the body, they got to go take him down off the cross and wrap him and put him in the tomb. The body can't be on the tree at nighttime because that's against the Torah. Okay, so he's in the tomb the 15th night, the 16th night, the 17th night, the 15th day, the 16th day, the 17th day, and he resurrects. Now, if you work this out, this would be Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, no. In ours, it's going to be a day different. But when you get to the end there, he's going to be resurrected at dusk, right at the end of Shabbat, between the 17th and 18th, right around Havdalah time. And 18 is the gematria for the word chai, which means life, right? So you're going to have, well, yeah, it's hard to make it match up with our calendar, but if you go through, you have 7 days in the week, right? And these 4 days he's inspected, 3 days he's in the tomb, that's your 7-day week, and he's resurrected right at the end of Shabbat. Because when they come in the scripture, when you look in John chapter 19, okay, John chapter 19 talks about the crucifixion, and in chapter 20, verse 1, it says, "Now on the first day of the week, Mary came early." In this translation, this is New American Standard, there's different ways they read it. "On the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came early to the tomb while it was still dark," because the day started at sunset. She came while it was still dark, and when she came, the stone was already away from the tomb. Yeshua was already resurrected. So you see the picture there? And 18 is the word chai, which means life.
Kenny, you had a question.
Yeah.
Tuesday, you have the meal on Tuesday, correct? And then you have the beginning.
Well, you have to remember that there's another issue that comes up here, and that is that you remember that Yeshua is following Torah. the people in charge of the temple in Jerusalem that were telling everybody what to do were the Sadducees. The Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection. They didn't believe in life after death. They didn't believe in the world to come. And they had their own system. They say supposedly that the Essene calendar was one day different. And so technically, according to the way they were following the calendars, he could have celebrated the Passover according to the Essene calendar, even though the rest of the people at the temple celebrated it on the next day. And he was crucified during their Passover. According to Josephus at that time, okay, you remember when Jerusalem was invaded and put under siege by the Romans? That happened during Passover. And that's why millions of people died. They said during that Passover Seder that year, in the time of Josephus, they actually sacrificed over 200,000 lambs. All between 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, which gives you an idea of how many priests that they had to have involved in that. They're going to sacrifice 200,000 animals in 2 hours. And they have all the tunnels there for all the blood to run down and all of the things all set up to take care of all of that.
Was the communion 2 days before he was sacrificed at 3 p.m.?
So what happens now, okay, when you read about Yeshua now, okay, you talk about the bitter herbs. Maimonides said there were 5 types of bitter herbs: Chazaroth, Olshen, Tomka, Carcabina, and Maror, which is the one they use today. Normally the maror at Passover that we use, normally they use some really strong horseradish. But you remember that when Yeshua was resurrected, there was a great earthquake and the graves were opened up. Well, at the time of the death of the firstborn, they say, like when the children of Israel left Egypt, at that time there was also a great earthquake. And there were 4 judgments on the gods of Egypt. The molten idols melted, the idols of stone were broken into pieces, the idols of earth were broken in pieces, and the wooden idols were reduced to ashes. And it said that during the earthquake in Egypt, that all of the idol temples in Egypt were knocked to the ground. Now, the Jewish people say, now listen to this is a very interesting scripture, and it ties in with the coming of the Messiah. A lot of people talk about Sukkot and the Feast of Trumpets at the beginning of that month, right, where they call it Rosh Hashanah, but actually it's Yom Teruah, the Feast of Trumpets. But if you take a look at the book of Micah, and this is what the Jewish people believe. I gotta go find Micah. Come on, Micah. Okay, Micah chapter 7 tells us this. And it'll give us something else to think about. Micah chapter 7, and I'll read this for you. I'll go back to I'll go back to verse 12. Micah 7, verse 12. It will be a day when they will come to you from Assyria and the cities of Egypt, from Egypt even to the Euphrates, even from sea to sea and mountain to mountain, and the earth will become desolate because of her inhabitants on account of the fruit of their deeds. Shepherd thy people with thy scepter. Okay, who's the scepter? That's Yeshua, right? Shepherd thy people with thy scepter, the flock of thy possession, which dwells by itself in the woodland, in the midst of a fruitful field. Let them feed in Bashan and Gilead as in the days of old, as in the days when you came out from the land of Egypt. I will show you miracles. And so based on this, the Jewish people say that the Messiah will return on Passover. I know different people have different theories, but this is one of the scriptures that they reference.
We're gonna come back on this.
Okay, so it says, on the same day, the 15th of Nisan, Israel is to be redeemed in the days of the Messiah, as they were redeemed on that day, as it is said according to the days in Micah 7:15, which was talking about the deliverance in the Passover. Okay, all the leavened bread is supposed to be out of the homes by 1 p.m. on the 14th of Nisan. Okay, it goes on, according to Josephus, that when they did the Passover, never fewer than 10 people to a lamb, walking 20 might be at a feast. The Passover could not be killed for a single person. It always had to involve a family, and that's according to Mishnah Pesach, C8, section 7. According to Maimonides, no spot or defect could be found in the lamb. Okay, Yeshua is what? The perfect lamb without spot or wrinkle. There's no fault in him. He's the lamb slain from the foundation of the world. According to Maimonides, no spot or defect. There are a possibility, according to their things, there are a possibility of no less than 50 blemishes that a lamb could have that could make it unfit for a sacrifice. And so the head of the house had to inspect that lamb all 4 days to make sure that lamb was perfect before it was sacrificed at the Passover. And that lamb became a part of the household. That lamb lived with them, tied to the bedpost for the 4 days until it was sacrificed. That's according to the Book Code of Mikdash, C7, section 1. Josephus said that at his time, the Passover was slain, sacrificed from the 9th hour to the 11th hour, 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Yeshua crucified, okay, gave up his spirit at the 9th hour of the day, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Was killed in the evening at twilight, the time interval between sunset and darkness. So it all ties, what? So it all ties in. It all ties in with Yeshua and the Passover. And that's how the Passover was supposed to be a picture to the Jewish people, how the Messiah would come as the Lamb. And you can read a lot of that in Psalm 22 and Isaiah 53, and how all of those prophecies were fulfilled. Basically, it shows you some of them in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And another interesting thing that comes about in John chapter 19 is that whenever anybody was crucified, the accusation had to be placed above their head. Right? In other words, if somebody was convicted of a crime in Pilate's court, all of Pilate's cases that were tried in his court, okay, all of that documentation was reviewed by the Roman government back in Rome to make sure that Roman law was being followed. In other words, if they didn't follow what they were supposed to do, their different government officials could get in trouble. Okay? So if we go to John chapter 19, when the prisoners go out there and they're crucified, they're on a cross, there's an accusation put on the strip over their head, saying, this man was found guilty of such and such a crime, and that's why he's being crucified by the Roman government. He's been duly tried in court and found guilty. This is the crime he's committed, and he's paying for it. Right? So in John chapter 19, this is what Pilate does.
The title.
Okay? John chapter 19, if you start at verse 11, Yeshua answered Pilate, you would have no authority over me unless it had been given you from above. For this reason, he who delivered me up. So he's not even holding Pilate. He's saying the person that put me here in front of you is the one. But the Father allowed it, right? Gave Yeshua the power to lay his life down and the power to take it up again. He goes on. As a result of this, Pilate made efforts to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, if you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar. So they're kind of putting Pilate on the spot. So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out, sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement in the Hebrew Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation for the Passover, the 6th hour, and he said to the Jews, behold your king. They therefore cried out, away with him, crucify him. Pilate said, shall I crucify your king? Okay, Pilate knew who he was. Pilate recognized Yeshua was the king. Okay, Pilate recognized that Yeshua was the king of the Jews. Maybe not Pilate's king, but he recognized him as the king of the Jews. They had kings of different nations, right? So he said, well, shall I crucify your king? He recognized Yeshua as the king of the Jews. And the chief priest said, remember, they're Sadducees, we have no king but Caesar. So he delivered him to them to be crucified. They took Yeshua therefore, and he went out bearing the cross, or the tree, probably the crossbeam. Okay, to the place they call the place of the skull. There they crucified him with 2 other men on either side, and Yeshua in between. Pilate wrote an inscription also and put it on the tree. Now this is what it says in English. Jesus, the Nazarene, the King of the Jews. In the Hebrew, now remember it's written in what? Hebrew,
Aramaic, and Greek.
okay? It says,
And Latin.
it says in verse 20 in Hebrew and in Latin and in Greek, and in the Hebrew it says Yeshua Hanotzri V'melech HaYehuda. And if you take the first letter of each word, Yeshua is the Yud. Hanotzri the Nazarene, the Hay, so you have Yud Hay, Vamelech, the king, Ha-Yehuda, you have the first letter of each word forms the tetragrammaton Yod Hey Vav Hey. And that's on the sign for all the Jews to see. The acrostic is staring them in the face. Not only is Pilate proclaiming Yeshua to be Yeshua of Nazareth, the King of the Jews, but he's actually proclaiming that he's Yod Hey Vav Hey.
It's about face, put in the face of the,
And because of that, it says in verse 20, therefore this inscription many of the Jews read, for the place where Yeshua was crucified was near the city, written in Hebrew and Latin and Greek. The chief priests of the Jews came to Pilate saying, do not write the King of the Jews. Write that he said, I am the King of the Jews. And Pilate said, what I have written, I have written.
We love that part.
So you see the picture there? Pilate recognizes, even though he's a Roman government official, he recognizes that Yeshua is the king. He hasn't, maybe here in the scripture, he hasn't accepted Yeshua as his Messiah, but at this point he knows who he is.
Wow.
And there is a book out there. How accurate and how true it is very debatable. It's called the Archko volume. And the Archko volume, okay, there was a preacher living in Missouri back in the 1800s. And he knew that the Catholic Church, okay, was at the seat of the Roman government, and that there were records and documentation extant of everything the Roman government did. And so he sent scholars from, the pastor was from Missouri, but he sent scholars from the United States over to Italy, to the Vatican, to go through their records. And supposedly in this book, the Archko volume, they found the testimony of the shepherds and Pilate's trial and a whole bunch of other information. And like I said, it's pretty debatable, and some of the English is a little more modern, and there's different terms that are used. But supposedly they translated it from archives they found at the Vatican in the 1800s.
Do you know the name of that minister?
Huh?
Who is the pastor?
It's in the book. I'd have to look it up. I've got the book in my library. It's kind of hard to get because it went out of print.
I heard they have a vast library of so much the documents.
And they give different testimonies and descriptions in the book of some of the different, the testimony of the shepherds. And they also say in that book that Yeshua actually, after he's resurrected, Pilate supposedly enclosed in a locked room, and Yeshua appears to him in the room.
what's the name of the book?
The Archko volume.
The what?
Archko, A-R-C-H-K-O.
A-R-C-H.
But like I said, it's kind of debatable, so it's, you can read it for what it's worth, and you gotta sift it all out, what's legit and what's not.
Make a great,
Huh?
make a great movie.
Whatever. There's a lot of things out there like that, you gotta be careful.
Right.
I'm just saying there's something out there.
That's interesting.
But right here, Pilate, right on the cross, he puts it right in front of their face, Yod Hey Vav Hey.
No wonder they were mad.
And you'll find when you go to the book of Acts, right? Who were all the people there on the day of Pentecost? They were all Jews in the temple. Thousands of people, thousands of Jewish people filled with the Ruach HaKodesh that believed in Yeshua. All of the believers in Yeshua in the beginning were all Jews. And after many years, eventually they became outnumbered by the Gentiles. And then the church changed everything around, and the feasts got dropped, and they came up with Christmas and Easter and all of these other things, and changed the Sabbath from Shabbat to Sunday, and did a bunch of other things. And they basically, the church basically just cut all of the Jewish roots out of the faith. And so now, what happens is, it says in the scripture that we're supposed to provoke the Jews to jealousy by showing them the light of the Torah. Well, you can't even tell Yeshua is a Jewish person in the church today. The Jewish people can't recognize Yeshua in the church today.
And
They don't celebrate.
They understand either.
Huh?
That's a good
Because
point.
they think the church agrees
No,
with
and so what happens is, you can't provoke the Jews to jealousy unless you're a believer and you're observing the Torah. Because that's what Yeshua followed. Yeshua followed the Torah, right? Yeshua followed the Torah. If you're going to be like him, then you follow it too.
Be
Like the
conformed.
apostles.
Eli story the night Herod Antipas
He did
defeated
what Yeshua did because he patterned.
massacred the innocent.
And so if you're going to provoke the Jewish people to jealousy, you've got to follow it better than they do.
Hey,
And I
a lot of
know,
work to do.
and I know, as Lloyd just said, we're all a far cry from that. I didn't get into Messianic Judaism until I was over 50.
Man, I was under a doctrine for 35 years, and when I opened up and learned this, I came out of that doctrine, and everything started, it all started matching, the whole book started matching up. I mean, everywhere I went, I had questions for 35 years, because I was under a doctrine. I get out of that doctrine, and I come into this faith, and, you know, here I am, and you know, I have an understanding I've never had in 35 years in Asia. You know, I've been probably 10 years.
So how long have you been researching this?
I'd say 10 or 11 years.
10 or 11 years, right? And it takes a long time. You have to remember that the Orthodox Jewish people start into this when they're 2 or 3 years old. We're starting out 50 years behind.
Right.
We have to run faster.
And so like every time I look at something, like I tell people, I find one new fact and I scratch it a little bit and it turns into a whole new encyclopedia.
Yeah. That's it.
And so there's never any end to it, right?
Right.
Curtis?
Right.
There's never any end to it.
Well, you scored all those books too, for
Huh?
$1. You scored all those reference books for $1.
Well, no, not for $1, but I did pretty good.
Yeah.
What happened was, well, I won't talk about that now. But what we're saying is that the Passover is all about
The
Yeshua.
Antiquarian Book Company, 1896.
And there's a lot more parallels in between there too. That's just a few of them we went through just now.
Here's the first page.
So we go back.
Thank you.
And like I said, we had the net and the fishes and the sons of God and the Passover. And we talk about the leaven. And
You want to read the preface?
go ahead and read verse 21 through 36.
Chapter 12.
Yeah.
Then Moses called out for all the elders of Israel and said unto them, draw out and take you a lamb according to your families, and ye shall pass it.
Gary took him.
And ye shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and strike the lintel and the two side posts with blood that is in your basin. And none of you shall go out at the door of this house until morning. For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians, and when he seeth the blood upon the lintel and on the two side posts, the Lord will pass over the door, and will not suffer the destroyer to come in unto your houses, and to smite you. And ye shall observe this thing for an ordinance to thee and thy sons forever. And it shall come to pass, when ye be come to the land which the Lord will give you, according as he hath promised, that ye shall keep this service. And it shall come to pass, when your children say unto you, what mean ye by this service? That ye shall say, it is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he smote the Egyptians and delivered our houses, and the people bowed the head and worshiped. And the children of Israel went away and did as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, so did they.
Okay, so they're being what? Obedient. They're being obedient to what Moses and Aaron told them. Right? What the Lord told Moses and Aaron, they told the people, and the people were being obedient to the Lord's commandment. And now comes the plague. Curtis, you want to go ahead and read verse 29 through verse 36?
Chapter
12.
29. And it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne unto the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. And he called for Moses and Aaron by night, and said, rise up, and get you forth from among my people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go, serve the Lord, as ye have said. Also take your flocks and your herds, as ye have said, and be gone, and bless me also. And the Egyptians were urgent about the people, upon the people, that they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, we all be dead men. And the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading troughs being bound up in their clothes upon their shoulders. And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses. And they borrowed from the Egyptians jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they lent unto them such things as they required, and they spoiled the Egyptians.
Okay, and in the Chumash it says, so they emptied Egypt. So they emptied Egypt. They took all the wealth of Egypt out with them, whatever was there. Now, and when it talks about the firstborn dying, okay, we'll stop in a minute. When it talks about the firstborn dying, you have to remember that the Egyptians were not following the rules that the Jewish people followed. And so an Egyptian man might go with a whole bunch of different women, and each one of those women from that man, that might be the first child that woman had, right? And if he went with 5 different women and it was the first child each one of those women had, that was their firstborn child, wasn't it?
True.
So technically,
It's my understanding that ancient Egypt was a monogamous society.
you know, that's your understanding. Other understandings are a little bit different. Some are saying that it could have been a lot more than just actual one-on-one. But it's still a horrendous thing to have the firstborn of every animal and the firstborn in every household to die like that.
That's right.
I mean, I don't know if anybody's here has ever had one of their children die, okay, but it's a very hard experience to go through. And so now the children of Israel are getting out of Egypt. They're going to go do their sacrifices. And Darnell said our time is up. So I'm just going to go to the board and say that this Torah portion here, we see a picture of the sons of God. We see Yeshua went to his disciples with the fishes and the net where they caught the 153 fish. He reminds his disciples of Passover and that Yeshua himself is the Passover lamb. And so the Torah is all about Yeshua and his sacrifice for us, that he shed his blood for the forgiveness of our sin.
Amen. Very good.
Okay? So, and there's a gazillion books.
You want to end with a prayer?
Yeah. Want to go ahead and close this in prayer, Darnell?
Go ahead.
To the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to the God of our Lord, Yeshua HaMashiach, the Son of God who sits at the right hand of the Father in honor, glory, and majesty. Father, thank you for this uplifting information, for it puts knowledge down in our very being about something we didn't really know about, you know. I know I didn't. And I just thank you for the knowledge and everything that you keep giving without end. And I ask that you watch over these as they leave and go each direction to their house, Father, that you protect them in their travel. And I ask that you bless the teacher, Kenny. I thank him for even being here and teaching. In the name of Yeshua HaMashiach, I pray. Amen.
Amen.
March to the volume.
Yeah.
We make a circle